Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A podcast. That's not the name of this thing.
It is not.
It messed me up with the screen. Sorry. This is the Inverted Orthodoxy podcast. We're really excited that you're here. I am Blake. This is Kyle, and this is Doug beside me. And we get to answer your questions each and every week. And we got some long ones, and we got some good ones today. So why don't we just jump right in with some AER?
Time for accusations, explanations, and recantations.
Perfect. So
Before you jump in,
go ahead.
I just would like to point out that a while back, Blake, you said something and got a lot of AER.
Yeah.
And so we had a little bit of fun that week, being
This is
like,
true.
You know, we really got to pile on you because you were being a little pointed and perhaps in your answers. And this week, it's all pointed in another direction as well.
Someone else is going to get...
So, Kyle, welcome to the hot seat.
All right. Well then, Kyle.
I think we should probably read both these instead of trying to deal with them separately because I feel like there's a lot overlapping. Just going to say that. I know it's a lot to read in succession.
I felt like they were different.
Okay, well, never mind then. They'll just read one at a time and deal with them separately, but I'm the
All
center
right,
of both.
get ready. This one is long but good. So cuddle up and get ready to... for nap. Not nap time. Story time. Jeez, it's been a tough morning. I'm sorry, guys. Here we go. Further to your discussion on the man versus bear question, Kyle at one point said that when these discussions come out, often the good guys end up shying away from the discussion for fear of being caught up in it. However, I would propose that it is part of the issue. The good guys need to step into the discussion and prove that they're still out there. As the quote goes, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The Bible itself says, rescue the perishing. Don't hesitate to step back and help. If you say, hey, that's none of my business, will that get you off the hook? Someone is watching you closely, you know. Someone not impressed with weak excuses. That's from Proverbs 24:11-12. I would question why good men are afraid of being caught up. Though no one is perfect, if you're not part of the problem, shouldn't you be part of the solution? Too many men sit back and watch while their friends and acquaintances make rude and demeaning comments about women or other men and don't step in and do anything. If men can't stand up to the people around them for the comments they're making, then how good are they really? I'm not suggesting men or anyone needs to engage in social media discussions, but this matter is so prevalent in day-to-day real life if your eyes are open to it. I think the larger problem here is that many men aren't willing to be inconvenienced by stepping into conflict by calling out improper behavior in the other men they are in relationship with, be that sexual or improper behavior or otherwise. There is an epidemic of men who are not rising to their potential or becoming the men that God has called them to be. In part because those men... I keep losing my spot. In part because those men has placed in their lives aren't willing to call them on their unhealthy, lazy, destructive behaviors. I apologize that this ended up turning into a bit of a rant, but if it were in the end in a question, my question would be, how do we better encourage the good men to step into the fullness of life God has for them and get them to be the protectors they were created to be? Most of us no longer live in a society that requires men to physically protect from the wilderness and elements anymore, but they can protect many with their words and their character and stop allowing other men to perpetuate their bad behaviors.
All right.
There you go.
Yeah. Let's jump in.
right.
I'll say first, with AER, we don't typically have to have a question. You get to make an accusation. Doesn't have to end in a question, recantation, or what's the last one?
You can make an accusation that will lead to an explanation or a recantation.
So for me, I first look and I'll say what I was saying last week did not negate that guys can't speak up in a bunch of different conversations to say something to somebody. And that is something that I regularly do myself. And I know many guys who will do that. And I've been a part of those conversations for those sake. My rant last week ended with how it will push men off of social media and that social media is an absolute cesspool and there is no need, and I don't think any good man's going to jump up and try to defend himself on Facebook ever. I don't think it's ever happened. I don't know if it'll ever be a good endeavor for me to jump up and try to justify myself on the internet, period. because there's no level of interaction, which is the thing I hate most about social media. There's no level of nuance or background information or character or anything like that, because even when somebody would try to do that, I've also seen a lot of those inflated stories of hear all the good things and we find out later that none of that was true.
Yeah.
So I don't think I was saying that guys shouldn't be stepping up, shying away from the discussion in the sense of period talking about being good men. I think it's a hopeless endeavor to go on the internet and try to have a good, healthy conversation. So I would advocate for all the exact same things happening. But because of what is happening on the internet, I think there are implications for real life. I'll say at the gym as one example, this is the first one coming to my mind. There are many times where I see somebody who would be struggling and could really help with me stepping in and assisting. I know this is maybe a silly example. And I've been willing to do so, especially with young teenage boys, like form or something like that. Hey, you could really hurt yourself, and walk in and step into a moment like that. I've seen women with similar moments of like, I could really help them with their form. But to not be the dude that's stepping in and telling a girl how she should do things for sake of all the conversations and not knowing where somebody's at, there's no way in the world unless, and I have stepped in when a woman's stuck below something and something's failing, then I'll jump in and help, no problem. But to jump in and try to insert myself to conversation, I know this is very, in some ways, removed from this conversation, but
Well, not really.
but there's
I can
implications
see
where
it.
I'm not going to step in as a guy for sake of mansplaining or whatever, whatever words you want to throw in. But I don't think this conversation has ever helped make good applications for men in real world to want to do better. To jumping to the end. How do we better encourage good men to step into the fullness of life God has for them? I think by committing and calling them to be in community with other men, the easiest and first thing. Where you can see people in their spheres, that would be a good impact. I know that, what's the phrase? You're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yep.
The average of the 5 people.
The average, right? Like get men around one another is a really important thing to do, and to evaluate which men they're spending time around. I fully admit and agree with a lot of the things you're saying at the end. There are a lot of men not stepping up, and that's what I was saying last week. Was I really cautiously took on men's ministry because there's a lot. There's an epidemic, you're right, with men who are not rising to the potential of becoming the men God's called them to be. And the often extreme end to jump past becoming the character is just as I said last week, the alpha maleness, like just toughen up and be hard and all those things. And that is not, I think, the characteristic that God has in design for men either. And so it's a shortcut trying to get to the end of some of the character work that would be done. Instead, it's a one full of gentleness and compassion, and there's a lot of the things that would be on the same list of what it means to be fully human, but in ways that men express them differently. Community is one of the biggest ones. I could say more, but I'll let you guys jump in if you want.
Yeah, I feel like there's 2 different things mentioned in this AER. The first one is that guys should be on social media defending their position.
No, it said the opposite of that, didn't it?
No, at the beginning it talked
Okay.
about that, which I'm like, no.
Yeah.
There's just don't go on social media.
Yep.
But then the other side is in the real world.
Yep.
What are you doing? Are you, as a man, standing up for those who are defenseless, those who are in need of protection, those who are in need of help? And I think that a lot of the guys that I know would do something if they saw it. I'll just speak to some of the guys that I know, and I think that the majority of them would do something if they saw it.
Yeah.
But certainly, it is an area where every man needs to be challenged by other men. We're going to get into books. I'm thinking of a book by Dallas Willard and Wilder.
Renovated? Or the other half
It's
of
either
church?
Renovated or the other half of church. I've read both
I think
of
it's
them.
Renovated.
Where he talks about, yes, Wilder is a neurosurgeon, neuro something, and a theologian, and talks about how transformation actually takes place from a scientific point of view. And the way that we deprogram our minds of the ways that we've learned and learn to walk in the new ways of Christ is through relationship. And he makes it abundantly clear in that book from a scientific point of view that the idea of sermons just aren't going to be effective. They're never going to change and transform a life. It's going to happen through honest relationship. So absolutely.
Yep. I think I discipline into guys' life intentionally too. I was asked to speak at a young adults thing one time on discipline, and I gave the analogy: discipline's like sparkles. Like my kids got to the age where like we use it, and once you have sparkles in the house, you're never getting rid of them. Like they're everywhere, and so they just spread. And I feel like discipline's the same way. Find one or two things you can begin adding discipline to in your life, and it comes everywhere. And I think that will then often form character in men, where if we don't have specific disciplines we're working towards, we lack character in all things as well.
100% agree with that. And I think that it's way too easy in our world in the 21st century to become a grown-up. And I'm not speaking men here, I'm speaking adults. And when we reach that point where we are independent, that we can choose to just do what we want. And as a result of that, it's easy to just forsake discipline.
Yeah. I think of a couple of different things that you guys haven't mentioned yet. My mom sent me an article about standing up and being a godly man, I don't know, a few months ago or whatever. And I read it, and the first half I agreed with, and then the second half I was really disgusted with. Maybe this will cause some AER directed at Blake, but I just think there's, from a Christianity perspective, there is an idea that men are supposed to be, like you had said at the beginning, like this alpha male. And I don't know that that is what God calls us to. And I think when I think of protecting someone, I don't think of fighting. I think of like helping the weak and oppressed. And that's like stepping into whatever, right? And I think I have 4 young boys in my family, or I have 4 boys, and they're all young adults. And I try really hard to instill that character in them, that they would be, I don't know what the right word is, but that people could depend on them. Like in any situation, that they would be the ones that could be looked at to help, or to just be safe, to be, whatever the words are there. And I think you're trying to do the same thing with men's ministry, Kyle. Like I just think those are the characteristics that are bigger. So I do think there's a little bit of, sometimes when I read questions like this or see this kind of rhetoric, then it's this idea that we got to stand up and fight. And I just don't see a lot of that in Jesus. And I think Jesus is probably the ultimate character that we're supposed to be like. So I don't think he would lay down and let people, do harmful things around him, but I just don't see him like storming the castle either, right? So I think we need to kind of define for ourselves, and then in those relationships you're talking about, what the character is that we really want to be like. Because like I've played hockey, I've worked in the, I guess blue collar world. I've seen men in conversations that are awful. Right. But again, then, you need to pick your spots too, right? Like, and I think that's kind of what you're saying about social media, but even in the live world, like if there's, 10 guys all speaking a certain way and you're going to be like, hey guys, you might not have any influence at all. Right. But if I'm friends with those 10 guys and I can pull them aside after, or even in that, I have some character or some respect. Then I can say, hey, maybe we shouldn't say things like that, or maybe we should think different. And that will go a way longer way
for sure
than me just, again, storming the castle.
And that's back to that cunning a serpent's part, right? Like, how am I going to make an impact best? It's not a justification to avoidance. It is saying, I do care about those 10 guys in the room. How am I best going to be able to infuse this? Because calling them out in a group of 10 guys, you may shut that moment down and make it really awkward in that room for the next bit, and then they're just going to have that conversation the next time when you're not in the room. Like to make an impact. And so it's tact.
I always think about, I remember watching a YouTube video about a guy who was really obnoxiously sharing the gospel with someone, and somehow it ended up on the internet. And and then they got confronted by somebody else who was like, what are you doing? Like, you're not helping them find Jesus.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, that's not my problem. I just need to tell them the gospel and then my work is done. And I was like, what? No, I don't. What are you talking about? It's not like
He's not
now
gonna like
I
our
can
book
wash
list.
my hands with this. I don't care if you accept Jesus or not.
Yeah.
At least I've done my part. No, the point is to win people.
Yep.
And so I think in how you approach these things, the point is to win people. And I agree with you, Blake. It's not about always being the alpha male. I think about the book that I think all three of us read earlier this year, Jesus and Nonviolence. Finding that third way that is effective.
Yep.
And that's what made Jesus so effective was he constantly found this third way of doing things.
Yep.
And as people who are supposed to follow in his wisdom, I think we would do well to do that.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right. You want the second one, Kyle?
Let's go for it.
All right. Kyle talked about men becoming apathetic to the issues facing women or feeling like they can't win even if they are good guys. I think it's worth noting that this is how women have felt for years, and that while not all men are bad guys, statistically speaking, women are more at risk with men they know, are related to, or in relationship with. I believe it's worth reflecting that those who deem as good men have the same risk factors, and we need to support women who have been impacted by the behavior of men and those deemed safe men. Just because you yourself would never fathom doing something violent to a woman doesn't mean the majority of your male peers are the same, even if you think you know them well.
And here's how I saw these two questions as different. Because the first one was, are they good guys if they're not doing anything? And the second one speaks to more, you may think they're a good guy, but they're doing things in their home or in private that you may be unaware of.
Yep. No, and yeah, you're right. In a second reading, there's a lot of space between these two. I would hope I didn't imply that men are becoming apathetic about the issues facing women. That is not something I would hope ever happens or would ever advocate for. It's something I personally am trying to be more and more aware of and gain more perspective in, and maybe language that we've just used, finding third ways or better ways to be impacting. I think we are getting tired of having conversations outwardly, and like I said, we've already said, I don't think it's fruitful to have them in certain spheres anyways. So I think it's more just the ways to, I don't know. I hope that's not the result, and I would advocate for guys learning more and more about that. One of the books we're going to be doing in the fall with men's ministry is The Sexually Healthy Man, and it has way wider application than just sexual health, implications on how women are viewed and what we have done and owning our part. It's really, really cool book we're going to step into. So always wanted to make that happen. But yes, statistically speaking, women are far more at risk with men. They know the majority of sexual and physical assaults are happening in close relationships. I'd assume part of that is obviously proximity, like you're around those people more often. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to get apathetic to that and just assume all men are hopeless to be able to be changed. I'm not saying we can just assume good and be completely optimistic all the time. But I think also the other danger, the other gutter would be to say, well, since we can't know, this guy looks like a good guy, but he's probably doing bad things behind why even try? And I'm not saying that's what's being implied in this question. I think I'm unsurprised by bad news anymore. And I'm constantly fighting with a hope that there will be more good stories. So I'm unfortunately just not surprised when stories like this I thought that guy was above it or whatever. Those stories come out for sure, but that doesn't slow my desire to see men grown and change, so we don't have to have as many of those stories in the fruit of what comes.
This question just breaks my heart.
Yep.
And not that they asked it, but the reality that it's speaking to.
Totally. Yeah.
It just breaks my heart. I think if you've been in ministry for any length of time, you at some point have had the opportunity to be invited into a situation that for the longest time appeared healthy and positive and good and in all ways seemingly life-giving.
Yep.
And then something reaches a breaking point and you are invited into something that you find out under the surface has been toxic, unhealthy, abusive, whatever other words you want to put in that are terrible. And it's been like that for a long time. And for a variety of reasons, it's just been unwilling. It hasn't been brought to light yet. I'm not going to say unwilling, but it just hasn't come to light because I don't think we can paint a picture on all of the reasons and say there's one reason why. It is heartbreaking that happens, and I don't think any of us are trying to minimize that. We've all been in those situations. We've all been invited in because of our role to those times when the mask comes off and what you thought was good turns out was just a show in public and behind closed doors it was a completely different thing. And it kills me every time I go there. And I just would like to say to anybody who finds himself in that situation, if you can, get help. If you can, get help.
This one kind of brings me back, I think, to how I ended or said last week that I just think left alone, people will do evil things. And when I say people, I mean anybody. I think it's horrific that men, the things that we do poorly or evil or wrong or sinful or whatever you want to call it, seem to be like violent or sexual in nature or just, I don't know what the right term is. It's different than how I assume stereotypically women sin, right? And I think women's sin can be not as in your face, right? Like it's, I think in a church setting anyways, if you were thinking about that's kind of the way I perceive it. I think even as being a pastor and, helping couples and stuff, right? Worst case scenario, the man's violent and hitting or whatever, but there's lots of things women do that can be really poorly done in a relationship too, that just don't get highlighted that way. Right. And I'm not saying that is why men do what they do or allowing men to do what they do. I think
you're also not defending it.
No, sorry, not
just
at
clarifying.
all. I'm just clarifying that this is what we see. To my point, the point is not that either is worse or better than the other, just that people do evil things when they're left alone or when they get absolute authority or they get in a place where there's no checks or balances, right? Which is back to your point, Kyle. People need to live in community and good Christian community where they are being influenced to work on the things that they do poorly, right?
Totally.
Like if I have a sin problem, I need to get around people who will encourage me not to have that sin problem any longer. Give me strategies and help and, accountability in my life to not do those things. Because if you leave me alone, I'm in trouble. And I think that's a lot of our world is we just get lots of people that get left alone to stew in their sin and then do terrible things, right?
I'll in large part agree with you, or I'll slightly disagree.
Okay.
Is that I almost think there is something worse to use a position of power and privilege over somebody else.
True. Okay.
Right?
And
so,
men typically are in that position.
Right. And so just by the very fact that even just how we're wired biologically, that we have more strength, like you automatically have a power over, and to use power over somebody else, and we could have the whole theological discussion. I don't think we will today over where different things land, if there is better or worse in when we are broken and in how we use our brokenness. I think there is a standard set really high for when we have power if we misuse it. That's a really bad one. And so, yes, absolutely. Both people in every relationship do a lot of bad stuff. But when we have a privilege, and to use that word, and then we use it against somebody, I see that as a greater evil.
I guess I was making the point that everyone sins.
Totally, and I fully agree. And that's where I would just add some...
But I do agree with you with the privilege thing, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think we would all agree, and hopefully these questioners are hearing us say that, we want men to change. We want everybody to change, but these questions are specifically about men. And in our roles, I hope that we are doing that as much as we possibly can.
Back to one last thing. Back
Yeah,
to the
totally.
relationships part that I think helps us all grow. I was just thinking there's a book we were just talking about before the podcast started about modern dating and implications there, where there's more of these kind of incidences happening because there's less relational connection to a new dating relationship.
Right, yeah.
First, like we used to find a partner like growing up, and my aunt so-and-so knew a young girl that she thought I'd like, so she'd recommend it. And now there's like a chain of relationship already involved and invested in there versus
Right.
swiping through the internet and finding somebody.
Yeah.
And there's no proximity there that if I don't treat this girl well, she's going to go back and tell my neighbor or my aunt what happened, and there's an automatic level of accountability and involvement. And I
Yeah.
think in our more and more individualistic worlds, even when we have friendships and relationships, we're more siloed into those things that I think there's a negative there. Back to the whole relationships also help purify and motivate and grow
Yeah.
and develop things in just who's talking about our relationships.
A number of months ago, I was reading on Daily Bible Discoveries. We've been walking through the prophets.
Yeah.
And in Jeremiah 10, have you ever, like, you read a verse
Yeah.
and you're like, it just hits you like a lightning bolt.
Yeah.
And you're like, how have I never seen this before?
Yeah.
And I know I've seen it before because I've read it before. Jeremiah 10:23 in the Message. I know, God, that mere mortals can't run their own lives, that men and women don't have what it takes to take charge of life. And I read that and I was like, is that not the source of so many of our problems in our modern individualistic culture, that we don't want to give anyone authority in our lives to say, I will be accountable to you and I will submit myself to you willingly.
Yeah.
Because I see fruit in your life that I want to pursue, because I see problems in my life that I want to deal with.
Yep.
For whatever reason, we don't do this as adults.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about the church, where it's founded by Jesus saying to people, "Come follow me."
Yeah.
Like,
And then echoed with Paul saying, "Follow me as I follow Christ."
well, I was going to get there, but we take that and we're like, yeah, of course he said that. No, it was a literal follow me. And then Paul, yes, follow me as I follow Christ. Paul, you have a lot of teachers, but you don't have a lot of fathers, but I'm your father. There's this element in the early church of people, and even Paul in his writings, older women teach younger women. There's this element of mentoring that was instilled in the early church, that you looked at the fruitfulness, not the charisma of someone. You looked at the fruitfulness of your life, and then in humility, you learned from that person. And part of that learning was I opened my life up to that person and let him speak into those areas and let them address things and bring correction. And then I adjust my life accordingly. We don't have that anymore. And I'm speaking in generalities here, but the reality is we take in things like advice to be considered, and very few of us who are adults have people in our lives who we say, what that person says, I will follow and trust until I see fruit. Not what that person says, I will consider and maybe implement occasionally.
Totally.
If I decide I want to. And I think there's something about, if we could get back that understanding that I can't run my own life. I need people who are speaking into it. And we could create a community that was like that. I read that verse and I was like, that is what the church should be. Less coming on a Sunday morning and listen to somebody speak for 20 minutes and then going for lunch. Someone that is speaking into my life that I'm being honest with, and that I trust enough that when they say, hey, do this differently, I will do it differently.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Doug. I don't need to add on, but I was just thinking, like, the way of Jesus is so opposite to what my human nature always wants to do. Like, what you're speaking of takes humility. Right off the bat, I'm like, well, I'm not very humble. I don't want to, have somebody have any authority over me, right? But yes, like, whether you're talking Christianity, and we are specifically, but in the secular world too, like we know that when we humble ourselves and we submit to good authorities and we're in good community, that things go well.
Yeah.
But our nature resists that at every opportunity it can. Right?
Totally. Yeah. Totally.
So,
Yeah.
all right, jump into a different realm altogether. What is your must-read books?
Okay, so
We're
we're setting some parameters for this.
or else we'll be here for 2 hours.
Yes, or 2 days. So when I talked to Kyle about this, I said, first thing we're going to say is we're not including the Bible.
Yeah.
We all recommend that book.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay?
So we
But
can't get any AER saying, you guys left the Bible off
Correct.
the list.
We're intentionally
assumed.
not including scripture,
Yeah.
not because we don't think it's important, but we're trusting that you understand that as 3 pastors, that's on our list.
That's minimum 66 books, so we can't really go there.
Well, you can have favorite books in the Bible.
That's true.
And then it was, let's take our top 5. So what are the 5 books that you would recommend? And that was the deal until Kyle couldn't pick 5. And he was like, I need 6. And so I gave him 6. And then he was like, I need 7. I need 7.
I never said I
you
had 7.
totally
I had
did.
2 sitting there.
And you were like,
and I
why
said,
couldn't
I
it be
really got to
7?
decide, but no, I don't think. Keelan, did I say 7?
I have to say, he never said 7.
You
It was
said, you're gonna
between
push for
2 of
7.
us, and you were convinced he was going to say.
And I said, no, I'm going to pick between
I
these
feel
two.
like we should have recorded that because I'm pretty sure you were like, it'd be better if it was 7. So, but in any case, so
we've
we ended up
decided on
settling on
6.
6
Yep.
that we would say these are our top 6
Yep.
books other than the Bible. That would
That
be our
we-
must-reads that we would say to someone, you
Yeah.
need to read these books.
Because I wanted to caveat that that this is, you're asking us what we would encourage as speaking to a general audience of, I'm assuming followers of Jesus or interested in being them. What are the books you would recommend? Because these are not the books I would pick if it was what are the books that have most impacted you, or these are not the books that I would most recommend to pastors, or even total books, because there's books outside of theology that might make that list for me. So this is our must-read books as pastors to a follower of Jesus.
Also, I just completely removed all fiction because there's some fiction books that I absolutely love that I was like, I'm not going to recommend that as if there's 5 books you need to read in your life or 6 because Kyle can't choose that you have to read in your life. A work of fiction is not going to be on there, but there are works of fiction that I absolutely love.
I will say you quickly were okay with jumping to 6 because I don't see you sticking to your made-up rule of just 5.
I could drop the 6th one.
I'm just teasing.
So I'm just easy
So
to
that's
get
the
along with.
parameters we made for this question.
Which we recognize wasn't inherent in the question,
Yep.
but I would just start listing off dozens of books.
And then we'd be doing this. Oh yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, it's going to happen next. So are we going to do like one book at a time, or are we going to have each of us go through our 6? Now, I want to also say, at least for me, these books are in no particular order. They're not ranked 1 through 6.
Same.
They're just my top 6 recommends.
Why don't you kick off?
Well, I was going to say, well, I don't have to go first, but
Well,
I wanted
go.
to say that I love being friends with you guys, because this is a question I ask often to both of you, and I have a brother who reads a lot as well. So I get to always read the best books. Like my list is way shorter total than your list would be, because you guys read a ton of books. And then I read one and I'm like, okay, what should I read next? And I say, what's the best book you've read this year? And you give me that book. So I'm always reading like the best books. Like I very seldom read a book that I think is bad.
Right.
Because I'm always reading like someone's recommended really good books. So I would say that to any of the listeners out there, if you want to get into reading, if you're like me and you don't read very much, find someone who reads a lot and then ask them what is the best book, which is basically what this question is.
Yep.
And then you'll read really good books.
Okay.
So that's how my list kind
Well,
of
do you want to
goes.
kick off then?
Sure. I picked some off the shelf because I came late to work today and then didn't get a chance. And I've already changed what's sitting there. But I'll start with The Patient Ferment, because that's a book that I read, and I know, I think you read it
Are
first.
we going to hold them up? Or
We can. If,
we got them here, the ones that we were able to access. So I feel like
all right.
if we can
So
hold them
that's
up.
The Patient Ferment. Who's it written by? I don't even know.
Patient Fermented, the Early Church by Alan Creeder.
Alan Creeder. So, yes, that would make my list. That is a really good book.
Yep. Cool. I do all 5 or 6. You want to knock through them all? Do
Okay.
you want to go one at a time? What?
I'll go
Let's do
all.
total.
Okay.
Yeah, total list.
Okay, so that one.
Okay,
now I gotta
I think that we should give like a 1 minute
Pitch?
reason or 30-second reason why.
Okay.
Not like this is a good book. This is a good book. Why?
Okay.
What is it about that book
I
that
was
makes you
wondering. I
recommend?
didn't want to say more than what I was allowed to say. So this is just about early church. It really shows how the early church, I guess, a little bit what we were talking about, or what I was talking about in the other questions, humbled themselves, submitted themselves, and were just trying to be like Jesus.
How they patiently fermented.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Totally.
that, I love that one. Next, I would say, what if Jesus is serious? He's read a few other books, Sky Jethani, but that was the first one. And it's just simply walking through the Sermon on the Mount and saying, what if Jesus actually meant we were supposed to live like this? And it's such a simple thought process. Good cartoons in this book. If you're like me, you're not a great reader or don't read a lot. This is good. Like
It's super accessible.
Super accessible. You can read that. And yeah, if you read it seriously, it makes you think. I gave that one to my mom, and she stole it. I had to buy another copy, and then I think she stole that one and gave it away.
Did you say, Mom, Jesus was serious about not stealing?
I will say, just as you mentioned that, like for the accessibility, that was something else we tried to consider in making our list.
Okay.
Was because both of us acknowledge Divine Conspiracy
By Dallas Willard.
Yeah, that would be one I would love if everybody would read it. But we've both tried to pass that along to people, and they don't read it.
they don't read it, no.
Accessibility was a factor.
Yes. Yeah, and that's worth mentioning as well. Yeah.
So that's to Holy Fire. That's
good
by
one.
R.T. Kendall. That speaks about living by the Spirit and by the Word of God, like reading your Bible and countering that, or not countering, balancing it with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
The first time I read that book, I'd never heard such a thing. I thought either Christians were Holy Spirit people or they're Word people. And that's typically what I see in a lot of denominations and Christian friends and family I have. But I thought this was awesome at speaking about that balance. Again, probably the way Jesus wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Canoeing the Mountains, that was just timely, but I think a great book on challenging us if you're in leadership, even I think just as a leader in your home, if you're a good dad or, want to be a good parent or anything, having to think that sometimes your ideas, I guess, are not going back to the well over and over and over to fix your current problem is not going to work. That you actually have to think about new ways. So that one, that inspired me to read a couple other books, but they won't make the list, but that was good. I guess I'll go with Bruchko because I'm holding it just because I have a couple others in my thought now, but this one was awesome.
If you want to take that one, that's on my list.
It's on his
I'll
list.
give it to
So
you.
Give
Okay.
that to me, and I'll
So-
count that.
I'll go with My Sheep Have Ears by Kath Lively. We've used that one here as a study doing listening prayer. Just an awesome book about how churches, community can listen to God together. That if you have a prophetic gift or you want to listen to God, that you're not just a lone soldier out there doing it on your own, but if you do it with community, how much value there is. So I love that one. And then the last one, which I'm slowly reading right now, again, is Letters by a Modern Mystic. Just because I think, again, super accessible, super simple premise, but just this idea of trying to pay attention to God every minute of every hour of every day.
Yep. Awesome.
There's my 6.
Do you want to go?
You can go. I'm not in a rush.
All right. So number one for me, I don't have the. Oh, then I need to borrow one of yours because the one that you and I shared.
Get it back after.
Yep. All right. Then I have 5. The only one I don't have here to hold up and to show is Everybody Always by Bob Goff.
Oh, that would.
I think every Christian needs to read that book every 2 years of their life. I reread it regularly because it is so accessible, but so profound that, hey, you need to love people. And this is what love looks like. Like it is amazing. the stories will move you. It is so accessible. Anyone can read it, but so profound. Our church vision statement is stolen right out of that book.
Yep.
Because I figured it's becoming love, which he talks all through the book about becoming love. And I readily admit I stole it from Bob Goff because I assume that people who are becoming love don't sue people for plagiarism. And so
We added imaging Jesus.
If
by
you
Becoming
read
Love.
the book, you would know that you're okay.
Yes, but I'm just saying, if Bob Goff's watching this, I know I stole it. I give total credit to you. I'm trusting that you will not sue me because you're becoming love. But that book, I have bought dozens of copies at this church and given them all out.
Cool.
To the point that I couldn't find one on the bookshelves before the sermon.
Yep.
That's number one. And that's really like a reminder of how to live. The second book I chose was The Blue Parakeet by Scott McKnight, which we have recommended countless times on this podcast.
And will again.
If you want to read a book on how to read the Bible, and we were looking through all of the books on how to read the Bible that we could recommend.
We counted 8 or 9.
Yeah,
that would make a top list.
That we've read.
Yeah.
This one by far would be the one I would choose. If you wanted to read more than one, I could recommend a bunch. But if I was only going to read one, this would be it. I am so thankful for this book, not just for my reading of it, but for how it helped people in our church learn to read the Bible, I think, in a much better way. This doesn't make the list, but he's written a lot of good books as well. So a lot of Scott McKnight
I'll
is
take it back
good.
here 'cause,
You can take that back because you're going to recommend that.
Yeah.
Next on my list, When Everything's on Fire by Brian Zond.
Man.
Blake's having pick regret.
Well, you guys picked it off the shelf, so when I looked at the shelf, it already wasn't on there.
Actually, he picked it off my shelf because his copy's not there.
My copy. Most of the ones I'm picking actually are off Kyle's shelf because I've lent all of my favorites out.
Yeah, and I know I have some at home, so yes, that's a good book. Keep going.
If you're going to be serious about following Jesus, at some point you're going to wrestle with doubt. You're going to wrestle with conflicting worldviews. You're going to wrestle with faith. How do you do that well? And I think every Christian who's ever wanted to engage with the reconstruction, the deconstruction, the renovation of their faith, which is going to impact all of our lives at some point, needs to read this book. It is absolutely, absolutely brilliant.
Yep.
Bruchko, which almost made your list.
On the
The
fly
only
got
reason
cut.
it probably hasn't is because I haven't read it in a while. I've read it twice, but it's probably been like over 10 years now since I've read it. So I don't remember it maybe as well as you do.
Well, I love this book because it's just an amazing story. We had a family over at our church recently, and they had a teenage daughter who was like kind of bored. She was like, "Do you have a book for me to read?" And I was like, "Yes." And I gave her this book, and I don't know if she read it or not, or Stephen started it, but I'm like, this book it starts off with just this amazing story of this person, just radical faith, who wants to go be a missionary to South America. And so he just gets on a plane and he goes. Like, it's crazy. But then what he learns and the way that he eventually wants to bring the gospel of Jesus to people that doesn't destroy their culture is so relevant to every Christian in the 21st century, North America. We are in a point where we all need to wrestle with the questions that this book asks.
Totally.
Every one of us. A lot of how we do church is obsolete. And we say to people, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you got to come to church. You got to do all of these things. And we got to learn how to bring the gospel into the current culture without sacrificing the gospel. Had a hard time picking between these ones. This one, I felt like I was going a little bit off the board. But The Beast That Crouches at the Door by Rabbi David Foreman. And this may be a cheaper one as well.
He's not a Christian, Doug.
He's not a Christian. This book is amazing.
Yeah.
As are all his other ones. Read those ones too. But I had to pick one for the list.
Yeah.
So I'm picking this one. I thought this one was brilliant.
Yep.
And I did have someone once say to me when I recommended this book, he's not a Christian. And I was like, read the book. Like, just read the
freaking
book. And you will see,
Yeah.
oh, I get it.
Yep.
Highly recommend this book.
Yep.
And no list would be complete
Without a Eugene
without
book.
a Eugene Peterson book.
It's just which one is the debate.
And that was the struggle. And Kyle, you know the struggle is real. I will readily admit there may be some recency bias with this book, because this is not the most recent Eugene Peterson book I read, but one of the more recent Eugene Peterson books that I've read. But this book took my breath away. He has written other books. I think I know which one, so I'm not going to mention that one. But he's written other books where he just takes a book of the Bible and just talks about it in such a beautiful way that brings it to life in incredible ways. And I'm not going to mention any other ones because I only have 6 by our rules. This is Traveling Light.
Yeah.
It is Galatians and the Free Life in Christ is the subtitle.
So good.
And wow. Just unpacking what really the book of Galatians is all about and how it's applicable to our life today.
Yep.
I had a hard time picking one Eugene book. And like I said, maybe it's recency bias, but this one would be the one for me that I think if I had to recommend one, this would be it. That is my list of 6.
So you've already mentioned a couple books that I haven't read yet now. So as you, the listener, I'm also taking notes. I'm like, I know Keelan's putting them in there. I'm like, all right, these are good. Next books.
Okay.
Right, keep going.
But
You
I
probably
will-
got a couple too.
You can't go wrong with Eugene Peterson.
No. And that was why we pushed to 6 books. My first one that was on the list was Patient for Ment as well. This is Blake's copy because mine's lent out right now, showing I would highly recommend it and have and do. The concept, well, I won't say any of the same things that you did. So the concept of habitus, like what we do constantly forming us that we were just talking about with men, so ingrained in this book, and the ability to bring the gospel but not try to rush and force it that you're talking about with Bruschko, that was so ingrained in the early church. Like they forbade people from evangelizing at times because the commitment to walk with somebody for the entirety of their life. If you shared what this whole Jesus thing is about, you then were taking on the commitment to be a mentor. And the church has never grown faster until it was forced down people's throats, but in evangelistic ways than in the first 300 years of the church when they were least concerned about evangelizing because they were so concerned about the character of Jesus being worked into them as individuals and a community, and the radical decisions that came to of nonviolence and those kind of things. Like this book is in every one of my top lists.
As you say those things, I just want to read it again. I'm like, that is good.
It's just so good. I'll give you your copy back there. Then to keep with the theme of ones that other people had. Blue Parakeet was also the second book I grabbed off the shelf that I have to again recommend. Same as Doug, there are many books on the Bible I could and would recommend, but if I have to pick one, because I didn't want to have my whole list be just that, this one makes the top of that list by a small margin, not a big one, but it's just accessibility. Like he uses fun stories of the blue parakeet, of the rediscovery, and things that just don't seem to fit. He does an incredible job of applying everything he talks about.
The case study at the end of the book really helps
for women in ministry, and so
where you just start to see the application of what he's talking about,
Totally.
which for me was what took
sells
that
this
book over the top.
Yeah, and I think a really important conversation with women in ministry too, to be able to put that on the front. And so this one, it comes up regularly in my recommendations. There's lots of double underlines, which is my way of saying this is really, really good. I underline a lot of my books. So Scott McKnight, and again, more of his books could easily be recommended, but that one's on my list. These are no in particular order. The Eugene one I had to settle on, because again, I could have just made a list of all Eugene books, was Practice Resurrection. And this one is just phenomenal. It goes through the book of Ephesians. And
So good.
yeah, it was between a couple of Eugene ones. I won't mention the other ones, but I decided on this one simply by scrolling through and seeing how many pages I had underlines on. And it helped me fall in love with the book of Ephesians in new ways as I was preparing for it this year, going back through this book. There's just so much to be found and challenging in this book as he goes through the book of Ephesians, which on its own is good. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the book of Ephesians, but there's just sometimes you come across a resource that helps bring alive in ways that you can't just read in Scripture. And it's the same Holy Spirit that I believe helped inspire and preserve the book of Ephesians that was so alive in Eugene that helps those same things come through in new words and new ways. So that one's it. And just the language of practicing resurrection.
That one didn't make my top 6 list, but could very well have. It is. Yes.
Just living in that resurrection life, like just so good.
Just the title, Practice Resurrection, is so like, you could just ponder that for a while.
Totally. James K.A. Smith, Desiring the Kingdom is the first of a series of 3, but this one has the most underlines in it out of all 3 of them for me. Worship, worldview, and cultural formation of how we are kind of ties in with patient ferment in that way. We are constantly being formed in our world, and to intentionally choose how we're going to be so as a community of people and as individuals, what we are going to do that will help shape and form us. A while ago on a sermon, I gave credit to doing an exercise at the beginning, talking about going to a mall as an exercise of like this worshipful experience, and kept people like leaning in like, what is he talking about? This religious place he went to. That's right from this book. So yeah, James K. Smith has, again, one more person I could recommend many of his books, but this is the one that I would shove in the hands of somebody really quickly. I have the study guide of the next one I'm going to recommend because I've got my copy lent out as well. So I just thought at least I could have something physical. Cross Vision by Greg Boyd makes my top 6 list. For one, I think bias of how much it's impacted my ability to see the Bible in new ways, to trust in God, see the unity between Jesus and the Father in ways that I didn't before. Like there's just so many things that were glued together in my view and in my faith as a result of Greg and his work, that one, though I don't fully agree with every part of it, I'm sure, just was this resounding response to so many things that have sat uncomfortable in my heart at different periods. And so I owe a lot to Greg and that book for that. Really interesting case study, too, that ended up pushing me to read his much larger work on the same matter. But yeah, I put that book in the hands of many people. And then last, certainly not least, again, these were no order. So Eugene kind of makes a double entry. A Burning of My Bones is the authorized biography on Eugene Peterson. And the reason why I differentiated, and I really had a hard time, if I was going to cut one from the list, this might have been it, but I couldn't, so I fought for 6, was there's something different about reading from Eugene, and I'll recommend him all day long. But to read in one volume about a life of a man who has not just thought about it and talked about it, but lived it. Like there's something compelling to see this can hit the ground in my life. Wynn just did such an incredible job writing about Eugene. It's an easy way to access a bunch of Eugene's writing because there's quotes all through it. Yeah. This is where rubber hits the road in comparison to some of those other books and the way they're written of, man, I could have a fraction of that in my life if I could live like Eugene did. So that one made the list.
That book alone inspires to be like Eugene, or more so be like Jesus, right?
Yeah.
But also gives so much credibility to his other writing.
Totally.
Which was good already.
Yeah.
And then you read that and you're like, oh, now.
It's interesting. I enjoyed that book.
Yeah.
When I read it. It did not have nearly the impact on me that it did on you guys.
Oh, interesting.
Because I'm like, I could recommend 10 Eugene books in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
And that one's, or even Eugene related books.
Yeah.
And that one probably wouldn't be on the list.
I've probably read that one 6 or 7 times.
Yeah, it was good, but it just, I was like, okay, that's cool, it's a story. But reading his writing, just there was one of his books that I was laying in bed one night reading.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I think I'd read the whole first chapter to Laura Lee. Because like every bit, I'd be like, oh, listen to this. Oh, listen to this. And like, I was like, I'm just reading you the book.
Yeah. There's one part that stands out really profoundly. And I was not sitting in the same Y in the road in my life as he was. But there's that moment where he's sitting with Jan, like deciding, he really is deciding, am I going to go into local church or academics?
Yeah.
And that one for me, and not that I've ever had the opportunity to have stepped into academics. That's not where I've been, but I have that kind of like wiring between two worlds. Yeah. And so that, and seeing how that has worked out in his whole life, was just really profound to me. And that struggle to connect theology and nerding out on all those things to a real life application for a local embodied church. So yeah, I can't say enough about Eugene, and that book makes the top 6.
And I would just like to say, honorable mention, Dallas Willard.
Yep.
Lots of Dallas Willard.
Yep.
Spirit of the Disciplines, Divine Conspiracy.
Yep.
We mentioned it earlier. The other half of church, that's not the one. Renovation.
Yep.
Those are the 3 that come to my mind off the top of my head.
Yep.
The reason why we didn't put Dallas Willard on the list was only accessibility.
Yeah. I'd say similar thing for myself about N.T. Wright too.
See, I don't find N.T. Wright as inaccessible as Dallas Willard.
Depends on
But
what it
he
is writing you're reading.
He is tough.
Yeah.
But Dallas Willard is the one that when I read a book, there's so much good in it, but it's a slow read.
Yep. Yeah.
Right on. I got to cut you guys off because we're running out of time. But that's cool. You guys get reading.
Sorry, not sorry for the purchases you're about to hopefully make on Amazon.
I'm not sorry. They're all good books.
Yeah.
Even the ones that didn't make my list.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and I'm sitting here as you guys are saying, and I'm just thinking, like, oh, I got other ones, right? Like, you guys must have done that before. I didn't get the chance. I just jumped on the podcast, but I've been sitting here this whole time going, if I had to make my top 6 now, it might change. But anyways, all right. See you guys
Thanks
all.
for tuning in.
Thanks for stopping by. Check out our website, invertedorthodoxy.com. Check us out everywhere, and you can listen to us all the places you listen to podcasts. See you next time.